Hello fellow researcher, my name is Guillaume Touillat from Lastig Lab in France. This talk will present recent work conducted with a few students on inferring the scale and content of a map using deep learning. This talk was supposed to take place at the 2020 ISPRS conference and will be available during the online event that replaces the Congress this year. You can find the paper in the annals of the ISPRS. But first, let me introduce you to the context of this project, which is cartography for visually impaired people. For instance, when visually impaired children attend to a geography lesson, they need to have a map to understand the lesson. Ideally, teachers can use tactile maps. Due to the limited perception of touch compared to vision, tactile maps are extremely simplified to be understandable. So it takes a lot of time for a professional transcriptor to handcraft a single tactile map. This is why we want to help these professional transcriptors by making this creation process as automated as possible. We want to create an application that takes an image of a map, extracts it from a geography textbook, and then retrieves the backbone of a tactile map that can be quickly finalized and printed by a transcriptor. The first step to derive this tactile map is to infer the scale, the geographic extent, and the content of this map from the image only. For instance, the scale of this map extracted from a French geographic textbook is 1 to 5 million. The geographic extent is France, and the map contains the large cities, the large rivers, and the main airports of the country. This is what we want to automatically infer from the image. To infer this type of information, we want to use convolutional neural networks because they prove their usefulness for image classification. Then, the second step is to retrieve the data on the inferred extent to finally generalize it at the inferred scale. On this image, you can see buildings that have been generalized to be printed on a tactile map using classical map generalization algorithms, but with specific parameters. This talk only focuses on the first step. This second step will be tackled in further research. In the second part of this talk, I will show how we prepared our data to train the neural networks, then what network architecture we used, and finally our results. Convolutional neural networks are very impressive to solve image classification problems, but they need large datasets of sample images to train. To create a dataset large enough to train neural networks, we used maps manually extracted from open source French geography textbooks. It took us a lot of time, but we obtained several hundred maps, which is enough for a proof of concept, but not enough to achieve very good classification results. Our map images extracted from the geography textbook can have very different sizes, but the neural networks usually process images with the same size. To cope with this problem, we tried two solutions. First, resize the image to a square with the good amount of pixels, or add a black strip on one side to make the image square. Our first results showed that the black strip solution was the best one, probably because resizing the images sometimes distorted them too much. Then, once we have square images, we need to annotate them manually. For scale, we decided to use 7 scale categories, such as world, country, or city scale. For the geographic extent, we just used labels that represent this extent, such as world, France, or Europe. For the map content, we defined different general themes that can be displayed at the same time in the map, such as cities, roads, hydrography, or boundaries. Now that we have our small training sample of map images, let's choose the CNN architectures adapted to our problem. We separated our problem in two. First, scale and extent inference are basically image classification problems, so we tested and trained several basic CNN architectures. We had our best results with a simplified version of the AlexNet. For map and content inference, we used an architecture that was successful with multi-level problems, called VGG16. We used a pre-trained version of the model that we fine-tuned with our map samples. We did not test many architectures, and there is definitely room for improvement. Finally, I will present the results obtained with these architectures trained with our geography textbook maps. Regarding scale inference, the results are pretty bad. We tested many different configurations, but our best classification results are around 60% of images classified with the correct scale category. These bad results cannot be explained only by the low number of samples used to train the models. Apart from the scale bars, it seems that there is no consistent graphic characteristics of scale across our maps. And scale bars are not drawn on each map, so the CNN did not learn to use them properly to classify scales. The results on extent inference are much better, particularly for extents that were abundant in our training samples. For instance, the model correctly classifies the maps of France or the maps of the world, but fails on this map of Texas because it was trained on very few samples of Texas maps. These good results for geographic extent also compensate for the bad results on scale, because scale can be derived directly from the extent and the size of the map. Here, the size depends on the size of the printing frame. Finally, the results of map content inference are pretty good considering the small size of the training set. Classification results are much better for map themes that appear in many of our training maps, such as cities, hydrography, or boundaries. The results are less convincing on flows that appear more rarely on our maps. The disappointing results on relief can also be explained by the diversity of relief representation in our map samples. This is an ongoing project, so we have plans to improve our results. Obviously, our first task will be to increase the size of our training set, to cover more scales, extents, and map themes, and also to increase the classification results. Then, we plan to infer more information from the map image to provide to our Tactile map derivation app. First, we plan to infer map projection because specific map projections can help convey the cartographic information differently. A Mercator map of the world is different from a world map with a polar projection. Then, the middle image shows our recent results on text recognition in an old map. It will be interesting to use such powerful text recognition models to extract the text from the map and then maybe later convert it to Braille language. Then, most geographic maps are shown with a legend, and for now, this legend is not really used in our classification models. We plan to use more the legend to help the inference of map content. I would like to thank you for your attention if you reached the end of this video talk. If you have any question or if you are interested in this ongoing project, feel free to contact me by email.